you've been hearing a lot of information about the Pomodoro technique and an app called Forest, this is the video for you because I'll be explaining exactly how I use the app Forest and the Pomodoro technique to do well in Year 12. Hey guys, and welcome back to another YouTube video. If you don't know me, my name's Emil and I'm a first year medical student at Monash University. Listening to productivity videos on the internet, you might have heard a lot of people talking about this app called Forest, or you might have actually heard a lot about this technique for studying called the Pomodoro technique. And when I was first starting with all this productivity stuff, I didn't really know the best way to be using these apps or to use the Pomodoro technique to best benefit my study. So in this video, I'll be explaining the ways that I use the Pomodoro technique and the app Forest to do that Pomodoro technique in Year 12 and how it benefited me. This video is going to be separated into three main parts. Firstly, a part about why I think Forest is such a powerful app. Secondly, a part about how I used Forest and how you can make the most out of the app. And then thirdly, a section about how using it benefited me and my study during Year 12 and also beyond. So now let's move on to the first part of this video, which will be about the benefits and power of using Forest. So the first powerful thing I think there is about the Forest app is that you can track the time you spend on the app. And the reason I think this is really powerful is because it gives you a nice retrospective view on how much you've been spending on all of your subjects. Now you might have seen the two Forest videos I've made so far, one about how much I studied for my ATAR and the other about how much I studied for my UCAT. And for both of these, I was able to have a really nice look back on how much I had studied because I used Forest really consistently. I think this ability to look back is really powerful because it also gives you some nice perspective on the sort of things that you did well on and the sort of things you didn't do so well, so that in the future you can sort of adapt and look to improve upon the things that you weren't doing as well in. I think this is especially powerful for Year 12 because you might have several subjects and they may all be completely different, but you might be expected to study all of them to the same amount of degree. Now, this information would tell you that you're probably spending too much time on that one subject, or that one subject is really becoming too much of a burden for you. And you might be wanting to look at some sort of solution you can find to sort of change the amount of time you're spending on that subject. Now, I think that's a really practical example of how Forest can really benefit you and change the amount of time that you're studying for your specific subjects. Now, the second thing I think that's really powerful about the Forest app is that it has the Pomodoro technique built into the app. I'll explain what the Pomodoro technique is when I explain how I used Forest in Year 12 a little bit later in this video, but essentially something that's really powerful about Forest is that it has the 25-minute default time set in, and then it also has an option to give yourself a 5-minute break. These two things really help just keep a seamless experience in the app, and I think it's really a good feature. Now, the last two things that are good about the Forest app, I think, is that you can make an account, and through that account, you can actually connect to friends on the app. And what this allows you to do is it allows you to connect with your friends and share how long you're studying, and it also allows them to share how long they're studying on each day with you. Now, what this actually means is that you can get a nice idea of how much your friends are also studying at the same time you are. But I do have to warn you that it can get a little competitive, and if you are someone who you know will really worry about how much you're comparing yourself to your friends, I do recommend to stay away from this feature because it can be a double-edged sword. Now, the last thing I'd like to talk about just briefly is that Forest has a very nice design, and I think being able to buy new trees and the coin feature inside the app itself all have a very nice sort of playful feel to it that encourages you to use the app. And I think when you're doing studying and things like the Pomodoro technique and studying and things, the easier it is to use anything like an app or any design that makes it easier to use is a huge step because it can encourage you to do more study. Now I'll move on to the second part of this video, which will be about what I think are the best ways to use the Forest app and how I use the app in Year 12. Now, the first main feature of the app that I recommend you do is that when you log in, you probably won't have an account. I do recommend just making an account so that your settings and times and everything saves on the app. So doing that, you can just sign up with your email, and it means that you don't have to worry about your progress getting lost, and you can actually also connect to the Chrome extension on the computer. But I don't really recommend using the Chrome extension. It's not as well designed as the phone app, but that being said, making an account is a very good start for using Forest. Now, the second thing I recommend you guys do is that straight away you have a look and make some tags for the subjects that you might be doing in Year 12 or otherwise. Now what I did last year was I made a tag for each subject that I was doing. So that was Latin, English, Spec, Bio and Chemistry. And then I also made some extra tags for the things that I was doing outside of class, and that was mainly just music. And then I made a small tag called Other, which I put like things like debating, public speaking, and all of those sort of miscellaneous things I put in that tag. Now what planting tags actually allows you to do is that once you plant a tree, you can actually assign it to a tag, and that will add the tag into a certain database on the Forest app. And what this means is that your database will slowly build up with trees that you've planted of a certain time in the tag. And what this allows to happen is that it will build up a time of how much you're studying each tag, and at what times you're studying each tag, and all of that juicy information that you can use later on. So once you've made some tags, that would be a good time to maybe plant your first tree. And so clicking on the first tree menu, you actually get a bunch of options. You can choose what trees you want to do, you can choose what tags you're setting for the tree, and then you can finally choose the time. And now this is where I'll talk about the Pomodoro technique a little bit. Now the Pomodoro technique is a time management strategy that was developed by an Italian, Francesco Cirillo, in the late 1980s. And what the Pomodoro technique essentially is that it uses a timer to essentially break down a period of work into several intervals which are interluded by breaks. So the classic Pomodoro is a 25-minute timer where you work for 25 minutes with very good focus, and then you take a break for 5 minutes, and then you repeat with another 25. And in doing so, the idea is that for every 30 minutes, you're doing 25 minutes of study, and you keep repeating, and you have 5-minute breaks to stop yourself from burning out or feeling really tired at the end of it. This technique was actually what I got on Forest 4 because it has a very seamless integration with the app, and it allows you to use this technique very seamlessly. Now, the classic Pomodoro is a 25-minute and a 5-minute break, and the idea is that the 5-minute break doesn't get out of hand, and that when it finishes, you stop and you start your next Pomodoro immediately. And there's a few different Pomodoro combinations. You can do 50 minutes and then a 10-minute break, and then you can do 50 minutes and another 10-minute break. And it really is up to you how you want to sort of bring those two together, because you can do 50 minutes, then 10-minute break, then you can do a 25 and a 5 and a 25 and a 5 again. And just mixing it up can give some more like creativity to how you're setting up your hourly work, and it also can give you some sort of inspiration for what you're doing and changing subjects, for example. Now, another technique completely separate from the Pomodoro technique that I use a lot on Forest was that I always found it really difficult to start studying, and I think this is a very relatable problem for many people doing BC and otherwise. And something I do on Forest is I just set a 10-minute timer and I'd start it, and I'd set it so that it would count exceeded time. And that's a setting that I recommend you turn on because it counts the time you do after the tree is finished planting. But the important part is that I'd set that 10-minute timer and I'd just start studying, and I'd let the timer finish, and then it would count the exceeded time that was going on in the timer. So then I could just continue studying without really worrying about the timer finishing or not actually recording the time I was doing. Now, I found that this was really good because it meant that I just set 10 minutes, and 10 minutes didn't seem like so much to me. And I was able to just study that 10 minutes and not worry about setting a whole 25 or a whole 50, but I just set that 10 minutes and start, and then allow my study to go on from there. And I feel like this is really good for people who love to procrastinate, because it's always very, very difficult to start doing something. And if you just start by doing that first 10 minutes, it's often really easy to get into the mood of studying. Now, the other important settings that are available in the Forest app, I think, are firstly that deep focus setting that I was talking about before. I actually turned this off because I felt like sometimes during year 12 I needed to talk to my friends to ask them a question about the work maybe, or to sort of get a screenshot, take a scan of the work I was doing. So the deep focus sometimes was impeding that, so I just turned it off. But that setting is completely up to you. The thing I would recommend turning on is that counting exceeded time. That is very helpful. I found that even when I was doing the Pomodoro technique, if I was really in the zone, what I would do is I just forget about my 5-minute break, let the time exceed and continue to count, and I just keep working. And I found that was really good as well, because It meant that I knew I was recording the amount of time I was doing, but also it didn't mean that I had to stop at the 25 minutes as the Pomodoro technique might, dictate. Now, I think that's all for the settings in Forest. The app is fairly easy to use and it's fairly intuitive, but now I'll talk about why I feel like using these study methods benefited me a lot in year 12 and why I recommend you do the same. Now, to start by talking about why it's so good to be using these Forest apps and these study techniques, I think firstly the most important thing is that it gives you a sort of structure to your learning and also makes studying a lot less daunting. Now, when you have a strategy like the Pomodoro technique or just to start with 10 minutes, it really does help you to sort of get in the idea that you are on top of your study and you're using management strategies and you're controlling the amount of time you're studying. I think this mindset shift helps a lot because it tells you that you are on top of the study that you're doing and not anyone else, and that it's not getting on top of you. When you're using strategies like the Pomodoro technique, it also gives a lot of confidence for how you're studying, and it also lets you really get on top of what you're doing. Now, in terms of specific benefits of the Pomodoro technique itself, I always felt like the Pomodoro technique always allowed me to study for longer durations without getting really tired or burnt out, and I think that's definitely due to having those 10-minute or 5-minute breaks in between each timer. The other thing that I found really helpful about the Pomodoro technique was that it really allowed me to split up my study and make sure I was putting in work into the subjects that I actually needed to do when I needed to do them. What this means really is that if I had 3 subjects to study for a night, I know I could do maybe 2 Pomodoros for each of the 3 subjects, and that would allow me to really make sure that I'm quantifying the time that I'm doing, and also that I'm not getting carried away with one subject and then failing to do the other 2, which are equally as important. The other thing that I liked about Forest was that it made studying seem a lot less scary. I think there's a big difference between coming home at maybe 4 and knowing you have until about 12 to study and feeling like you have to study for that entire time, compared to coming home at 4 and knowing you have to study from 4 to 4:25 and then you have a 5-minute break, and then you study from 4:30 to 4:55 and then you have another 5-minute break. And I think this allows you to really sort of do your studying in the moment without worrying about huge periods of time that you actually don't necessarily need to all use, and which you actually might have rather wasted away if you hadn't been using the Pomodoro technique. Now, some cautionary advice I have to give about the Pomodoro technique is that you have to be careful to not let your breaks ever get out of hand. So if you set a 5-minute break at the end of a 25-minute Pomodoro, it has to be a 5-minute break. You can't be going over 5 minutes or thinking to yourself, just 5 more minutes, because that 5-minute break will eventually go to, 10, 20, 30, an hour, and you'll have wasted an hour away, and that will be the worst time you have ever spent in terms of productivity and even relaxing. That time is very important that you stick to 5 minutes and then you get back to your Pomodoro. When you actually finish, make sure you say to yourself at the start of a Pomodoro that it is your last one, so that you know you're not taking some random 5-minute break at the end that extends, but that you're off for the night. I'll talk about what helped me about the second strategy that I mentioned, which was just setting a 10-minute timer and letting it run. And I already briefly talked about this, but I was someone who procrastinated a lot, and I know it's a problem for many people. And the reason I use a 10-minute timer is because a 10 minutes seems like a very negligible amount of time. What this strategy allows you to do really well is that it allows you to just get started by doing a 10-minute block, but then the fact that the time exceeds means that you can continue if you find that that 10-minute block isn't too bad after all. And this timing sort of also helps a lot, because at times you might have something looming and you don't know when it's going to arrive. So you can just set a 10-minute block and study and let that time exceed, and study until that thing that's supposed to arrive actually arrives, and then you can deal with that when it arrives. But then it also means you haven't really wasted that time in between when you were told it was coming. For example, you're waiting for dinner, you don't know when it's going to come, so you can just set a 10-minute timer and then let that time and study until dinner comes. And that allows me to sort of stop wasting a lot of time and making sort of pointless excuses I don't know whether I'll be able to do a 25-minute Pomodoro because dinner could come any minute. But if you set a 10-minute timer and you let that time exceed, that allows you to sort of study and use that time a lot better than you would have been able to if you were using a Pomodoro. I think that brings me to the end of all of my study techniques related to Forest use and using the app Forest. I think it costs about $3 from the App Store, and I highly recommend that anyone studying for any exam like Year 12 or in school in general or in university even can make use of the Forest app. And I think that it's a really powerful studying tool that anyone can use to make the most out of their time and to get the most out of their study. If you guys learned anything from this video, or if you found this type of content helpful, please do leave a like, comment, or subscribe. And as always, thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you guys next time.